I'd now like you to please welcome to the stage Dr. Amy Abernethy, Principal Deputy Commissioner and Acting Chief Information Officer of the FDA. Joining her on stage is Bob Cusack of The Hill.
Life of the FDA. So I came from the tech industry where life was quick and moved fast, and I thought that I was going to get to the FDA and a day in the life was going to be fairly slow and working slowly on a series of focused problems. And in fact, what I found in a day of life in the FDA is a large variety of really complex problems, all of which are moving forward very quickly. And so in any one day, I'm probably working on everything from CBD to planning our data and technical infrastructure to trying to figure out performance review plans for a whole bunch of new employees and then doing something different the next hour.
So both in the short term and in the long term at FDA, where is the agency headed? We were talking a little bit backstage about implementing the 21st Century Cures Act, which is something obviously Capitol Hill is very concentrated on. But where do you see the agency fitting into the future of healthcare?
So in the short and the long term, I mean, if we take 21st Century Cures as a starting point, Cures gave us a set of compelling tasks to do, but didn't tell us how. And so in the short term, we have been putting in place the necessary work to start in the pathway of how. Very practically, this includes, for example, the framework for real-world evidence. But I think in the long term, what this ultimately is the agenda setting for the agency where we have modernized clinical trial infrastructure, that the agency is able to not only start to move forward, but also we make sure that that modernized clinical trial infrastructure allows us to develop drugs more quickly, and that those drugs are now not only being developed more quickly, but reviewed more quickly. Practically speaking, I think for the American people, that means quicker medical product development, but also more precision medicine drugs, but it also means that we've got a large book of work in front of us in terms of the tasks that go along with getting that done.
When you talk about approving drugs, and the FDA has been approving biosimilars at a quicker rate, how is that possible? Why is it quicker now? And of course, to some, it can never be quick enough.
So first of all, I want to acknowledge what you just said. For some, actually for many of us, it can never be quick enough.
Right.
And so our task at hand is to continuously become more efficient without reducing our standard of being confident that this drug is both safe and effective, or that this medical device is working as expected. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. Going back to your question, remind me what part of the question you want me to answer?
The smart part of the question. I can't remember it myself.
We all want smart parts of the question.
No, but getting at the issue of proving drugs and the regulatory hurdles, because there are safety issues, and some people have said, well, Europe and different countries, they do it quicker. So, and Congress has always obviously been pressing for decades for FDA to move quicker. But where are some of the issues that, wait a minute, you can't go too quickly?
So there are a number of ways that we can work to make the system more efficient and move things more quickly, but also safely. So first of this, there is the need for enabling regulatory pathways. And so what you've seen at FDA is, whether this is in the biosimilar space and trying to create the mechanisms for us to approve more biosimilars or more generics, mm-hmm. whether this is our ability now to do, for example, real-time oncology review of drugs in collaboration with the drug manufacturers, so that they're sending us the data even before they've created the full package, and we can start reviewing the data months before we normally would have. These processes and these regulatory pathways are starting to happen. And so one way of making this faster is to have clear regulatory pathways that medical product developers know how to use, and that we are also all keeping our eye on to make sure that they're working as expected. So one is through regulatory pathways. Another way of making this process more efficient is to make sure that we are harnessing all of the data and technology systems in front of us to put that into play. So for example, we are motivating the ability to use real-world evidence, data that currently exists in electronic health records and other systems in a smart and thoughtful way as a part of the medical product development process. We need to figure out how to use that data and how to put it in play. Another way of making the system more efficient is to make sure that we have trained inside the FDA as well as trained the entire biomedical community to make sure that we all understand when can we use, for example, adaptive design clinical trials and novel clinical trial pathways. When can we ultimately take advantage of real-time oncology review and other solutions? So we need the people who know how to do it. So one's regulatory pathways, two is data and technology, and three is people.
As far as access, when FDA approves a drug, obviously there are other players in the healthcare field, government players, CMS. How do you interact with other government agencies, whether it's sharing your thoughts on treatment A or how does that work?
So in terms of interacting with other government agencies, one of the things I thought before I came to FDA was that FDA was its own box and each agency worked quite uniquely. In fact, what I have found is that we have a series of, for example, intergovernmental meetings where we talk together about how do we promote and advance the concept of data sharing, or how do we solve problems of understanding what patients need and what the FDA's responsibility is versus what CMS's responsibility is. So the first way that we work together is we actually start talking and clarifying whose responsibility it is to do X and Y, because one of the hardest parts is when that gets murky. I think the other side of that is making sure that the American public understands whose responsibility is to do X and Y. So first we talk internally, and then we make sure we clarify that for the American public.
What's the best way that Congress can help FDA, other than funding FDA, but interacting with oversight and going forward, 5-10 years from now, working collaboratively?
So resources are always important, so I will continue to put a pin in that. But I think, 21st Century Cures is a good example of Congress advocating for the importance of not only a good idea, but how are we going to move forward and ultimately modernize what we're doing and develop better cures. Similarly, we need to continue to work with Congress to ask the question of what should we be doing on the cutting edge? How do we, for example, understand the role of artificial intelligence and not only just figure out how to fund artificial intelligence programs, but think about what kinds of regulatory as well as legislative pathways we might need there. And I can think about that within the context of what do we do in the various pathways that take us along the way of continuing to move in the space of precision medicine.
I was just going to ask about precision medicine. Where do you see that going? Where do you also, another issue that's big right now, that's going to be, I think, even bigger in the coming years is health privacy. I mean, everybody is getting healthcare on their phones now, so there's a role of technology, but then there's also privacy issues.
Precision medicine is an interesting space. So ultimately what we're seeing is precision medicine moving forward right in front of our eyes, right? The availability now of medical products for problems that affect a alteration that may only affect 2,000 or 10,000 people. The more that we have medical products that are specifically aligned with the individual problem this person is suffering from, the more that we are going to be able to address in curative ways the problems that people face. So I see precision medicine moving forward. But precision medicine isn't just genomic and genetic medicine, right? Precision medicine is making sure that the treatment is as aligned with who you are as a person, regardless of your genetic features. So what you believe in, whether or not you have coexisting heart disease and cancer, what your prior medical problems were. Did you have an appendectomy as a child? So prior histories. All of those things and those features going into being able to better decide the right drug or the right medical product for you at this moment in time. And so that's where precision medicine is ultimately going. And what we're seeing now is the development more of not only medical products that are specifically individually aligned, but also data that helps us understand for medical products that aren't perfectly targeted for the person, how to now target it better for the person because we have better diagnostics or the better ability to bring in data about the individual and match it to what we know about the medical product.
What do you do day to day that you see and you have seen maybe outside of the Beltway that affects patients? Whether that be outcome of a certain drug or a story that you've heard of FDA policies affecting real people.
So, I stopped to look at you as you asked that question because I came to the FDA because of real patients. So the story is back in 2008, 2009. I was a melanoma doc sitting in the clinic, and I was always struck by the fact that for this person sitting in front of me, 60% of the time, I didn't know what to do. Not because I didn't try really hard to look in the medical literature and learn from my colleagues and figure out what to do for this person, but because the answer didn't exist. So I think as FDA, one of the reasons I came to FDA is that ultimately this is the place that starts to advance and continues the development and approval of medical products that happen to help that person in the clinic. So what I want to see in the next 10 years is it's not 60% of the decisions that I'm making don't have evidence behind them, but it's only maybe 5% or 2% because we have more and more of the evidence of what to do for this individual patient. And so ultimately, I think that every decision every day about patients sitting in the clinic are informed not only by the FDA, but all of the evidence development process.
One of the things with Congress, with C-SPAN 1, C-SPAN 2, we see Congress every day, but we don't see HHS every day. We don't see the FDA. So, and I know you haven't been at the FDA for very long, but other than that, you deal with multiple issues. What has surprised you working at the FDA, and what do you think people should know about the agency that they may not know?
So what's surprised me about the FDA? So I think there's a couple of things that have surprised me about the FDA. I think that one of the first things is working on this from the industry side. The FDA felt like predominantly regulators and police people. I'm not going to call them policemen because they're police people. And that the other side of what the FDA is setting the guideposts for where we go. That usually happens through the issuance of guidances and other regulatory documents that says to the entire medical product industry, here's how to do your work. Here's how to plan your clinical trials. Here's how you should think about the process of collecting data and sending it to the FDA. Here's how we think about safety. So the FDA sets the guideposts of where we go so that as an entire medical product industry, we know how to move in that direction. So I think that's one of the things that surprised me.
What are some ways that outside groups can help the FDA? As you mentioned, you've seen the FDA from both sides now.
So I think, for example, patient groups and other outside groups say what you need. One of the things I was struck by in my time as an oncologist and my time in industry was oftentimes the FDA was doing its work predominantly with industry and government as stakeholders and patients as, this is a decade ago, patients a little bit more on the side. And what we've tried to move to in the last 5 to 10 years is more patient centricity. But outside stakeholders, the more patients and the American public can say, this is what we need, the more that the FDA can start to develop compelling processes to move in that direction, whether that's patient-reported outcomes or patient-informed drug design or being smarter about how to right-size the use of a medical product once it gets into the marketed setting.
What is the best way for patients to communicate with the agency, to say what they want?
So we're developing a number of processes. We have a patient affairs staff that maintains a communication portal, so it's essentially a website and a channel to be able to communicate with the agency, so that's one way. I think there's a number of patient advocacy and trade groups who know direct channels to communicate to the agency, and so certainly being involved, for example, in something like longevity or forensic cancer research or other patient advocacy groups in the cystic fibrosis space are ways that you can communicate through the agency as patients. But the patients also, the FDA listens to people who have real problems and then try and understand from people's real problems. And so we often have listening sessions and meetings where people can show up and say, this is what it feels like to be a caregiver of a child with this type of muscular dystrophy, or this is what I need when I'm suffering from pain or other problems that look like this.
We've got a few minutes left. We'll open up for questions, and if you can just wait for a microphone to get to you and just identify yourself, and hopefully we can get a couple in if we keep them to short questions.
So there's near-term things and there's longer-term things. In the near term, we have a series of strategies for how we address when companies are, for example, marketing outside of their label, and that includes warning letters and a series of regulatory actions in that space. And so we will continue to do that. We will also continue to push forward with post-marketing studies and post-marketing commitments and requirements and the expectation to understand better how medical products are performing in the post-marketing space. I think, though, that where we need to be going in the future is being much more thoughtful and smarter about how we ultimately get information to consumers and the American public. We're seeing a series of steps moving in that direction. To give you a sense of the vision that I imagine, ultimately in the future, the label for a drug, the information about that label should be able to get directly to the consumer, married with individual personalized information about the consumer so that that person can understand this particular drug and its potential positive effects as well as deleterious effects in a way that makes good sense for them in their day-to-day life. And ultimately, we can build those data and technology solutions, and I think that's where the future goes, and we need to take a series of steps to get ourselves there.
Just wait for the mic to get to you, and just please identify yourself.
You bet. Hi, Neil Neuberger. I'm Director of Health Innovation for the Bipartisan Policy Center. The Internet of Medical Things greatly accelerates the number of attack surfaces that make vulnerable back-end systems, in ways that we've never heard of before. And to its credit, the FDA's recently issued draft cyber guidance and things like that. But what more do we need to do around post-market surveillance of devices, given that so many only have clearance and are subject to introducing all sorts of threats, embedded or otherwise, into medical records and systems and things? Thank you.
So this is a grave concern of the agency, and I think a grave concern of us as American public. The world that we're living in, the Internet of Things, our connectedness, our availability of data has the promise of doing great things for us, but comes with the risk, as you said, attack surfaces. We are doing a number of things, as you mentioned. We've been issuing guidances. We've also tried to get fairly creative. One of the examples in the creativity space is Suzanne Schwartz and the members from our device organization. They are working directly with the white hat hackers to try and stimulate the hacking community to show where the gaps are in the cyberspace and in device in device security, so that those gaps can then be repaired by the device manufacturers, and for us to continue to keep an eye on that. And so what I think you're going to see is a series of progressively more innovative solutions to try and go after this problem.
We have run out of time, but I want to thank Dr. Abernathy for joining us and giving us the FDA's perspective. Please thank her and get ready for the next panel.